Set in the Khao Phraya River in Bangkok, Thailand, the century-old floating market swarms with merchants moving from one stall to another in their own boats. Phraya is a worker movement game with commodity speculation and pick-up and deliver mechanisms. Players do business on a floating market, centers of economic activity at the time, trying to get the best prices, making offerings in the temples to win Buddha's favor or even approaching the king's barge. Welcome to my Gamefound preview of Phraya. Hey everyone, this is Thekos, and in this video I'm bringing you my preview of the worker movement game Phraya that was just successfully founded on the crowdfunding platform Gamefound. This is a game with really interesting mechanisms and ideas, so it's definitely worth it to stick until the end of the video. But as usual, you'll find timestamps in the description so you can watch the parts that interest you the most. Bonus points for watching the entire video. A big thank you to DMZ Games and Nice Game Publishing for providing me with a preview copy that I could preview for my channel. Okay, I'll guide you through this game by first talking about the goal of the game, and then I'll continue with the setup and instructions before I'll end the video with my review of the game. For this preview, please keep in mind that this is a prototype, so everything is still subject to change. This includes rules, general gameplay, artwork, as well as components. Let's begin with the goal of the game. The game end is triggered if 2 of 3 possible endgame conditions are met. The royal tithe is completed, Buddha is properly worshipped, or market supremacy is achieved. As soon as this happens, the game ends immediately and the victory points are added up to determine the winner of the game. Okay, now that you know what's needed to end the game, let's talk about setup. First, assemble the 4 main board parts forming a square like this and use the clips to pin them together. They are double-sided and you may arrange them in any way you want as long as you ensure that they form a square with these indented sides on the inside. Once assembled, place the royal barge token on the central water crossing. Place the board with the tracks beside the main board, leaving some space between both boards for the card market. Then place the market discs on this third section of the appropriate row of the market price chart and place the merchant on this box. Place the rower tiles in a stack right here, the royal favor tokens here. Then shuffle the 25 market cards to form a deck and place it on this space below the board with the tracks. Draw from the top of the deck and place 1 card face up on each of the marked spaces left to the deck. Shuffle all the basket tiles, randomly place 1 on each basket stall, with the price tied up, on the main board and leave the rest on a stack near the board. Sort the restaurant order tiles by the numbers indicated on their backs, 1 to 4. Shuffle each stack separately and leave them beside the board as well, face down. Place 1 tile face up from the first stack, numbered 1, in each of the 4 restaurant stalls on the main board. In a 2-player game, remove 1 tile from each stack. Each player then chooses a color and receives a personal board as well as their matching pieces, which is 1 boat, 5 starting cards, 7 stalls and 12 discs. Note that the preview copy came with 8 discs only. How many you will receive in the production copy I can't say at this moment. In a 3-player game, each player returns 1 stall to the game box. In a 4-player game, they will each return 2 stalls instead. The player who has eaten pad thai most recently will be the first player. Alternatively, if you can't recall, you can determine the starting player like this. Take a deck of cards and deal the same amount of cards to each player. Then every player turns over a card. The player with the highest card takes all face-up cards. Do this until all cards have been played. The player with the most cards receives a point. Repeat this in its entirety until one player has 17 points. If it takes too long, you just continue the next day. The starting player receives the first player token and 8 coins. Each of the other players receives 1 more coin per position. The second player receives 9 coins, the third one 10, and the fourth player receives 11 coins. Note that there was no starting player token included in the preview copy, so I can't show it to you. In game order, players place their boats on the channel section connected to the outside of the main board. So here, or here, or here. Or here. You get the picture. Then, in reverse game order, players place 1 of their stalls on an unoccupied goods stall. That's those with the stall zone depicted, like this one for example, or this one. Last but not least, create a general supply accessible to all players with all good tokens, flowers and coins. So, this is how a table should now look like in a 2-player game. But how is the game played? Well, allow me to show you. Beginning with the starting player, each player will take a turn in clockwise order until the end game condition is triggered. On your turn, you must perform the following 3 phases in order. Play a card, move your boat, and interact with adjacent stalls. Let's start with the first action, playing a card. At the beginning of your turn, you always play a card from your hand into the area in front of you, resolving its effect. The cards all have different effects. This card, for example, lets you move the merchant exactly 2 steps to the left or right. Then you manipulate the prices of 2 goods. One goes up by 1 and the other down by 3. This card lets you move the royal barge exactly 2 crossings, and then all owners of the stall adjacent to it receive a flower for each of their stalls adjacent to it. This card is a very special one. You move the royal barge by 1. Adjacent stalls receive a flower, and then you take back all the cards in your discard pile into your hand. For each card claimed, you receive a coin. But you may not move or do an interaction this turn. This is the only card with such a restriction. One thing to keep in mind, you always must resolve the card's effect. Once the effect is resolved, leave the card on the discard pile in front of you. You can only play the cards in your hand, not the ones in your discard pile. Whenever you acquire new cards during the game, you always put them directly into your hand. I'll show you how to do that later. The second action you must take is the movement action. In this phase you must move your boat at least 1 channel section up to as many sections as the number of rowers in your board. At the beginning you have 2 of those in your boat. Whenever you move, you need to keep in mind the following rules. A boat moves from 1 channel section to the next, considering a section as the water channel between 2 crossings. You cannot retrace your movement. If you enter a section from 1 crossing, you must leave it through the other. You may move over other players' boats if you have enough movement, but cannot stay in the same section. Only 1 boat can be at the same time in the same channel section. The royal barge, on the other hand, blocks all movement through the crossing it is on. You always must move at least 1 channel section. If you start the turn blocked by the royal barge, you must play a card that moves the royal barge so you can also move. This is only applicable if the barge blocks the only crossing you could move through. There is no movement outside the main board. The channel sections that connect to the exterior are simply blind alleys. The last thing you must do during your turn is the action phase. You do this by interacting with the 2 stalls adjacent to your boat. Additionally, you can interact with the royal barge in case it's in an adjacent crossing. There are a few things to keep in mind here. You can only interact with each stall or the royal barge once. You can choose with how many of those you want to interact, but only once each. Also, you choose the order you interact with every stall and or the king's barge. I'll go over all market stalls a bit later. Now let's talk about the player board, which represents your boat you use for navigating Phraya. Here you see 2 rowers. These indicate your speed, so when you can move 1 or 2 spaces. In the course of the game you can hire more rowers and thus increase your speed by 1 or 2. On your boat there are also 2 stalling baskets with enough space to add 4 more that you can acquire during the course of the game. Each basket can hold 2 goods, 1 of each of those represented in the basket itself. If you want to transport more goods, you'll have to buy more baskets. I'll go over how you can purchase rowers and baskets a bit later. We still need to speak about the merchant. That's this guy here. The merchant starts on this initial space and can be moved into this circle using hand cards. This card, for example, would move the merchant here or here. The space he lands on indicates which goods can be manipulated in the price market chart. For example, on this space, meat and fruit could be manipulated. This card lets you manipulate 1 good 1 space up and another good 3 spaces down. You can choose which one applies to which good, but they need to be different goods. These are now the new prices to buy and sell these 2 goods. There are also cards that allow only 1 modification, such as this one. Also note that prices cannot go higher than the rightmost box or lower than the leftmost. Any additional points are simply ignored. Remember when I said that the third action lets you interact with the 2 adjacent stalls? Well, let's talk about those market stalls now. There are 6 different kinds of stalls. Let's go over those. The goods stall lets you buy or sell goods of the indicated type: vegetable, fruit, fish or meat. You pay or receive the number of coins indicated on the price chart here, multiplied by the number of goods you're trading. You can buy or sell as many goods as you want, but you may never buy and sell at the same time. Note that if you trade with a goods stall that belongs to another player, that player receives 1 flower token from the supply. The basket stall lets you buy the respective basket in the stall. You pay the indicated price, flip the basket tile and put it on one of the empty spaces on your player board. From this point on, you have space for 2 more goods, the ones that are indicated on that basket tile. After the purchase, replace the tile with another basket from the basket stack. But instead of buying a basket, you can also hire an extra rower by paying 1 meat or 1 fish. Then take a rower tile and place it on an empty bench on your player board. From this point on, you may move an additional section each turn. The restaurant stalls always have one order up. You may deliver the required goods depicted here, returning them to the general supply to fulfill the order. You gain the indicated amount of coins and put the tile face down near your board for endgame scoring. Then you replace the order tile with a new one from the lowest numbered stack available. The temple stall lets you make an offering. You choose a good among those you have in your baskets and look on the temple track for the leftmost empty box of said type of good. You return the chosen good to the general supply and the number of flowers depicted in the box. Now you can place a disc of your color in that space. At the end of the game you will earn points for the number as well as the type of the offerings you made. The scribe stall is essential for the main mechanism of the game, which is managing and playing your hand cards. Here you may acquire market cards from the ones displayed below the tracks board. You pay the cost either in coins or in flowers and place the chosen card in your hand. Then you slide the cards to the left to fill the now empty space and replace the rightmost empty space with a face-up card drawn from the deck. This is the administration stall. Here you may acquire a new stall. Choose an empty goods stall, they are the ones with the stall silhouette at the top. Pay 10 coins and place one of your stalls there. This will make you earn specific benefits during the game and will give you some victory points depending on how many of each type you have. Well, let's talk about your stalls. These are an integral part of Phraya. At the beginning of the game you own one stall, and as you have just seen you can acquire new ones at the administration stall by paying 10 coins. You can only build stalls on goods stalls where this silhouette is displayed. But why should you own stalls? Well, there's several advantages. You will get a king's blessing when the barge moves to a crossing adjacent to your stall. More on that in a minute. You will get 1 flower every time another player interacts with one of your stalls by buying or selling goods. You may gain victory points at the end of the game depending on how many stalls of each type you possess. Also, as a reminder, when you build the last of your stalls, you trigger one of 3 endgame conditions. I know that there are a lot of rules in this game. But don't worry, there's just one thing left you need to know, the royal barge. The royal barge starts the game in the central crossing and, when it moves, it does so from crossing to crossing. The royal barge only moves when you play a card that indicates so. As with the merchant, the barge must move the exact number of crossings indicated on the card and cannot go through the same channel section twice on the same move. The player's boats do not block the barge movement. Once the move is completed, the king gives blessings to the owners of all stalls in the 4 channel sections adjacent to the crossing they are in. Usually this blessing takes the form of 1 flower token, as in all basic cards that move the royal barge, but some market cards give different blessings, such as this card. This one gives those owners 3 coins instead. The king gives a blessing to each stall no matter who owns it or who played the card, which means that not only can various players get blessings at the same time, but also some of them can get more than 1 blessing if they have more than 1 stall in an adjacent channel section. Do you remember when I said that you could also interact with the royal barge if you end your move in a channel section adjacent to it? Well, you can. You do so by giving an offering to the king. You choose an empty box in the king's chart, pay the cost shown, which can be coins, flowers or goods, and then place a disc of your color on that chosen box. When you do so, you immediately get a king's favor token. This token you can discard on your turn to buy 1 good from a stall for free. This only applies to 1 single good. If you want to buy more, you need to either pay for them or discard an additional favor token. You can also discard such a token to buy a basket or rower for free when you're at the respective stall. Last but not least, you can skip paying flowers when making an offering in a temple. You still have to pay the offered good, but you can at least skip the flowers when discarding a king's favor token. Since giving an offering to the king is a regular turn action, you can do it before, after or between interacting with the stalls on your turn. Okay, last but not least, the endgame. Let me remind you of the 3 endgame conditions. The royal tithe is completed. That means that one of the rows of the king's chart is full of discs. Buddha is properly worshipped. This means that there is at least 1 disc in the rightmost section of the temple chart. This includes the last 2 columns on the right. Third, market supremacy is achieved. This means that a player has placed all their stalls on the main board. When 2 of these 3 conditions are met, the game immediately ends. Now the points are added up and noted on the score pad. The preview copy did not have one of those, so I can't show it to you. You receive 1 victory point per 5 coins you have. Simple as that. You get points for your offerings in the temper chart. 2, 3, 4 or 5 victory points depending on the good type. Then you determine the majority of discs in each of the 3 sections. You earn the indicated victory points if you have the majority in each section, splitting the points among drawn players rounded up. If there's any section without one of your discs, you take the indicated penalty. Beware, if you have no discs at all, you get all 3 penalties. You receive 12 victory points if you are the player with the most discs in the King's chart, or 6 victory points if you are the one with the second most discs. If you draw for the first position, split 18 victory points among the drawn players. In this case, there are no victory points for second place. In case of a draw in the second position, just split the 5 points among those players rounded up in both cases. Be mindful of the fact that in the preview copy, the amount of victory points you receive for this section are different on the board and in the rules, so things might still change a little bit here. Also, you earn 8 victory points for each group of 3 discs in different rows you have, a combination of coin, flower and good offerings. Then you reveal your fulfilled order tiles and earn the victory points shown on those tiles. All of your market cards that grant you XP are then added up. By the way, it does not matter if the card is in your hand or in the discard pile. It only matters if you own the card. Finally, calculate the majorities of player stalls and each type of good stalls. If you have the majority on any of them, take the first number of victory points indicated in the chart, or the next one if you are second. Deal with draws just like you did with the King's chart. At the end, add all those victory points for each player to determine the winner. In case of a draw, the player with the most unspent royal favor tokens is the winner. If the draw persists, the winner is the player with the most flower tokens. If it is still a draw, determine the winner playing another game. Or you can just share the victory like in most games. That's pretty much all you need to know to play Phraya. Whew, that was a lot to get through. But now what do I think about the game? Well, let me tell you. Despite it being a prototype, the components are quite nice, as is the art style. There's an upgrade pack that improves the components even more. I would definitely choose that one. The game is really thematic. First of all, the theme is really interesting. Rowing from stall to stall in the floating market is interesting. Also, the theme ties incredibly well into the mechanism of the game. Speaking of, the mechanism of Phraya is really interesting. It is described as a worker movement game. At first I wasn't sure what that exactly means, but it's quite accurate. In essence, you have one worker that you move around in order to take specific actions. This is a really fresh concept that allows for quite interesting strategies. The game has a good player interaction. With your actions, you manipulate market prices, block passageways with the royal barge, and fill up the temple and king's tracks. All of this influences the other players since they need to work with these situations. I like it. The game is very thinky. On the one hand, it is quite an elegant game that does not have too many rules but a lot of depth. On the other hand, it is very prone to analysis paralysis. You really need to think a lot about your moves, especially in the later game. I like thinky games, but this one is really brain-burning at times. That can be positive or negative, depending on what you're looking for and who you're playing with. Take this with a grain of salt, but in one of my games it seemed like it is possible to maneuver yourself into a position where you can't possibly win anymore, although you still have quite a few rounds to play. In said game, my opponent was pretty much controlling the board because of one single card that let him move the royal barge up to 3 spaces. I couldn't possibly get out of that situation. I was still able to win because my opponent made a few other mistakes that I recognized and exploited. But if he hadn't made those mistakes, I probably couldn't have won at all. This seems to be a bit unbalanced, but first of all, this is a prototype copy, and secondly, I can't guarantee that I really couldn't have done anything else to win. But it was a really tough game, where there were a lot of actions that I just couldn't do because of the lost control because of one card. Although this is a prototype, there's few issues I need to mention. The card's effects were not explained in the rules, and some of them were not as self-explanatory as I would have liked them to be. Thus, some of the card's effects we had to guess. Also, some of the colors of the player piece did not match 100%. This is not a deal breaker, but it would have been nice if the colors had matched. I suppose that this will be rectified for the production copy. Also, the rules were a very rough prototype. I'm sure that they will be enhanced quite a lot for the production copy, but this way some of the rules were not as clear as they should have been, but I think I understood them well enough to test and review this game. A bit of board game experience and passion comes a long way here. All in all, I was very surprised at how elegantly this game plays. With relatively few rules, the game has a lot of depth. But don't be fooled, it's still a game with medium complexity. The theme is really well made and the components as well as artwork are nice, and will be even better for the production copy, I'm sure. If you enjoy thinky games with a substantial amount of player interaction and tight resource management, I definitely suggest this game. In case there's a late pledge, you might still be able to hop on the Phraya train. As usual, I will put a link to the project in the description of this video, although the project is over, because maybe there will be a late pledge or any other way to pick up the game later on. Congratulations, you made it to the end of my preview for Phraya. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, why don't you let me know in the comments? And if this is the first of my videos you're watching, why don't you check out the other videos on my channel? I'd really love to see you there. Alright. Thank you so much for watching. I will see you in the very next video. Take care everyone. Cheers and stay healthy.